And
Let's see
that's
if he can
why
handle the pressure.
we wanted to bring on Charlie O'Connor from The Athletic to hopefully make us happy and tell us how there's going to be hockey some point in our near future. Charlie, how you doing, man?
Doing good. How you doing, guys?
We're
We're
doing
not
great.
sure yet. We're waiting to hear from you.
Yeah, we want to hear something good. You bringing me some good news here on the show today. Let's talk about the state of hockey right now. Where are we at with this potential tournament? Seems like the regular season is over now, and we're headed to the postseason.
Yeah, that's the plan. This is definitely the most optimistic I think anybody has felt about the possibility of hockey coming back, and the 2019-2020 season finishing, some sort of resolution that people can accept, rather than just having been canceled and having no resolution whatsoever. Yeah, it seems possible. They came up with the plan. The players and the owners agreed on this return to play plan, which essentially is a 2014 tournament. The actual Stanley Cup playoffs, it's interesting the way they're doing this. The actual Stanley Cup playoffs won't start until it's down to 16 teams. But there's going to be this play-in round where 16 teams basically play against each other to see who the 8 teams are that are going to join the other 8 teams that all get buys in the actual Stanley Cup playoffs. And then there's going to be a Stanley Cup playoffs as long as, everything, works out the way they're hoping it's going to work out. But this is a big first step. You can't – I think Gary Bettman in one of his availabilities basically said that, we couldn't even think about the possibility of coming back unless we knew what coming back would look like. Now they know what it looks like. Now it's just a matter of whether they can make it work.
All right, before we get to the Flyers, I have a question that's probably going to be the wet blanket of this discussion. Exactly how are the Canadian teams going to play the U.S. teams when nobody's allowed to cross the border?
Well, they have so I believe, and this I think is what Daly said, who's one of Bettman's right-hand men. All athletes have been deemed essential workers by the by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. So then it's just a matter of the one issue they could run into is players going from Canada to the U.S. is no problem. Players going from the U.S. to Canada, they would have to do a 14-day quarantine at this point before they can actually go out and practice. So there's a lot of hurdles. That's a hurdle they potentially would have to overcome, where players that, let's say the Toronto Maple Leafs, let's say you have American players in the Maple Leafs that are going back to Canada, maybe they have to go back home early to quarantine for a bit before phase 2, which is essentially the players practicing in small groups with their teammates before that can start for Canadian teams. There's a lot of balls in the air right now, but the good news is that there's a plan, and but yeah, that's absolutely something that has to be taken into account. There's a lot of complications that are going to pop up in this whole thing.
Initially, there were going to be multiple host cities. Now it seems like potentially 2 host cities. Where do we think these games are going to be played?
Yeah, there's a lot of options. You mentioned the Canada thing. There were some Canadian cities that were part of it. That said, the current rules that the Canadian government has implemented in the country would make it impossible for a Canadian city to be a hub city. So those cities are on the list, I think, in case Canada changes their rules before this would kick off. Yeah, there's a lot of possibilities. Vegas has been thrown around as a legitimate possibility, I think, for both the NHL and the NBA. So that's certainly up there, especially because of all the hotels and, the luxury they have there. And I know Vegas has been, desperate to get people back in their city, considering how much they're focused on tourism and whatnot. So there's a lot of different possibilities. Philadelphia is not one of them, which, really shouldn't come as a major surprise, considering, our restrictions are definitely tighter than they are around most of the country. But yeah, they have some possibilities. Columbus was another option. So we'll see how it goes. But they wanted to give themselves a lot of different options, I think, just so they weren't locked into only a couple cities in case, there's an outbreak in 2 months in that city that makes them have to change gears.
All right, let's talk Flyers. So the Flyers were rolling before all this happened. They were pretty healthy, except for a couple guys. How are they, as far as you know, how are they doing as far as everybody being healthy, mentally and physically ready to go, including whether or not Nolan Patrick will be back for this?
Yeah, all the guys who were dealing with, I guess, traditional injuries, So you had Nate Thompson, you had Phil Myers, and you had James Van Riemsdyk. We're all dealing with traditional hockey injuries. They're all good to go. JVR was probably the one that has benefited the most from the pause, if you want to look at it that way, because my understanding is that he would not have been ready for the start of the regularly scheduled playoffs. He might not have been able to come back until like late April, early May. He's good to go now. Whether he's 100% or not, I'm not sure, but he's certainly good enough that he could play if they started hockey tomorrow, and I imagine he'll be even healthier if they get going in July, or early August, which is right now the projected time this would all get back going. As for Nolan Patrick, that's still unknown. When we talked to Chuck Fletcher last, he didn't sound super optimistic that Patrick would be good to go for a restart. That said, now that there's more of an idea of when this restart would actually happen, you don't know. My guess is that Patrick would come back to Philly for a training camp, and they would just kind of go from there and see how he's feeling, see how comfortable he is with the migraine disorder and everything. I wouldn't rule it out. That said, personally, I'm not super confident. I think they had in their heads that we're shooting for him to be fully ready for next season. But now you're looking at a season possibly restarting in August, which is only a couple months earlier than the next season would have started. So I'm not holding my breath, but I'm hoping because I really want to see the kid back out on the ice.
So that leads to one other question. If this is all going to go into August, what are they going to do about next season? Because most athletes need that length of off season to recover. I know they've had time off now, but then they're going to start up again, and are they going to wind down again and start it regularly, or are they going to start late?
The plan is definitely to start late. Obviously, when the exact time the season would start is going to depend on how long it takes to get through the playoffs. So that's still very much up in the air. But both the NHLPA and the owners agree that the players need an off season. Whenever this is done, they need a traditional off season. And yeah, the next season will probably start late. It'll probably start, assuming they get this done and they get everything finished, it would probably start, December, maybe even January, because you're talking about they probably want, 2.5 months or so at least of an actual off season for these guys to recuperate, especially the guys who were in the playoffs and whatnot. So yeah, I certainly would expect next season to start late. Plus, there's an added benefit for the teams as well, is that the later they start, the better chance there is that maybe they'll be able to get fans back in the stands for next season. So, if they were to start this in October, I don't know how realistic that is. Maybe by early next year, maybe, God willing, there's a vaccine or something, and maybe they can have fans in the stands and their revenue goes up. So I would definitely expect next season to start late, absolutely.
So we mentioned how they're going to go right to the playoffs, sort of a different format, and then Jeff mentioned how the Flyers were hot going into it. So Flyers end up in the top 4. Explain this little round robin we're going to play for seeding of the top 4 team thing going on that the Flyers are going to be a part of.
Sure. So that was something that the NHL and the NHLPA agreed to, because the teams that were going to get this bye, essentially, they wouldn't have to play in the play-in round, they expressed the totally reasonable concern that they would be at a disadvantage in the first round of the playoffs if they hadn't played a competitive game of hockey for 5 months and they were going up against a team that just kind of played themselves back into hockey shape by going through this play-in round. So they came up with this idea for this round robin, what it looks to be like a 3-game tournament where the 4 teams in the conference basically play each other once. And there should be, I think there's going to be a couple exhibition games that are more or less going to be preseason before that gets kicked off. But then there's going to be this round robin. The Flyers who play 1 game against Tampa Bay, Boston, and Washington, 1 game each. And then the records of each of the teams from those 3 games would decide who is the 1 seed, who's the 2 seed, who's the 3 seed, and who's the 4 seed. Now, the Flyers come into this as a 4 seed. They had the fourth best record out of those 4 teams. So for them, this is kind of a win-win. Either they stay where they are, which whatever, that's where they're going to be anyway, or they do well in this and they jump up the seeding. The only negative they run into is that because they come in with the lowest seed, the worst record, they would lose any tiebreakers. So if 2 teams, if they have finished 2-1 and Boston finishes 2-1, Boston gets the better seed, even if the Flyers won the head-to-head matchup, which is fair, the advantage you get for having the better regular season record. But the Flyers have to be looking at this as, this is all gravy. Worst case scenario, we're exactly where we probably should be. Best case scenario, maybe we jump to the 2 seed or the 1 seed and get an easier first round matchup.
So, what does Coach Fletcher think? Does he think that this is all going to work out, and does he think that the Flyers are in a good position?
I think everyone's just kind of in a wait and see approach. Obviously, Chuck Fletcher wants hockey to get back started, just like everybody does. I'm sure Alain Vigneault has has the same feeling. This is what they do, and especially for someone like like Fletcher and Vigneault for that matter. The season was looking like it was playing out pretty well. Fletcher and Vigneault, these are guys that they want all the work they put in over the off season, this season, even during the pause. They want it all to to be rewarded in some way. So I'm sure they're rooting for it. Now, what they feel about whether it's going to happen, I get the sense that the NHL is optimistic as a whole that they're going to be able to pull this off. Now, they know that there's still a lot of things they need to do. They need to come up with agreements with the players about safety concerns. They need to make decisions. There are some players in the NHL that have type 1 diabetes. Are they going to play? Are they not allowed to play? How is this going to work? There's a lot of things they need to decide, but I definitely get the impression from the people I talk to in and around the NHL that there's a feeling that we're going to get this done. So now you just kind of got to cross your fingers and hope.
Well, we definitely hope that there's hockey for you to cover and report on, and hope we can get you back when that happens to talk about what comes next. Really appreciate the time, Charlie.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Take care of yourself. Stay healthy.
Yeah, you too.